All right, in our course on how to read the Bible as literature, we've been surveying some of the major genres that are available in the book of Psalms. So, a psalm is a genre, and then there are different kinds of psalms. We've already looked at some of them. Some of them are classified according to content, and some of them are classified according to form. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, here we're talking about acrostic poems. Um, so a psalm like a messianic psalm is uh, that kind of genre because of its content. It has predictions or a pattern that is used to describe Christ later on. And then sometimes it's according to form. So, like we're talking about acrostic psalms today, they might have uh, several different themes in the psalm, but it's all one kind of psalm because each of the lines begin with a different Hebrew letter. So this one is form rather than content, and it's structured around the Hebrew alphabet, one verse for each letter. And so the most famous acrostic that's in Scripture is Psalm 119. And here you can see how Psalm 119 lays out according to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So you might have seen in your version of Scripture the passage divided into Aleph and Beit and Gimel and Daleth and He and Vav and so on, all of these different letters. And you might not have known what those words meant. Well, they're actually the Hebrew letter. So let me show you that a little bit more closer if we look at a Hebrew Bible. So Hebrew is read from right to left. And so you see on the right hand side, about the middle of this column, you see the number 119. That represents the number of the psalm. So this is Psalm 119. And then you see in parentheses, there is an Aleph. That's the Hebrew letter, sort of like an A. And each verse doesn't represent a different letter this time. Each section represents a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. So you can see all of the lines. There are 5 lines in this picture. All of them begin with that Aleph. So this doesn't translate very well. Remember when we talked about parallelism, the way that Hebrew poetry comes together is really, we're fortunate because it translates well into any different language. We can sort of translate the parallelism that is there. Acrostic, not so much. So we get a clue in the English text when they give us the letter out in front, or they may give us some other letters in the text to remind us that is there, but we miss it because we're not reading it in Hebrew. So this is Psalm 119, and several others are acrostic poems. Um, so why did they write from A to Z like that, as it were? Here are some suggestions that commentators have made. It adds design and convention and order to the psalm. So it's much like maybe a Shakespearean sonnet that has a structure of iambic pentameter. There's a particular rhyme scheme at the end of each line, and then the last 2 lines have the same rhyme scheme at the end. Um, and it's just designed to be the structure in which the poet will pour his ideas into that structure. It makes the psalm even more beautiful when it's structured, and then you see that the author is using that structure to create something good. So it gives some order and design to the psalm. It adds beauty. It helps in memorization, perhaps, if I'm a young person or even an older person and I am looking at the psalm and I'm trying to memorize it. Knowing that it starts with a different letter might just be the learning device I need to help me remember what that psalm is all about. Um, if we have a psalm that goes from A to Z, it might also indicate that we have what the psalmist considers a complete discussion of the topic. Like we might say, this is a discussion of grace from A to Z. That might be what the psalmist is indicating as well. But I think it's a structure and I think it's beauty. And so I wanted to introduce you to some of those. Here are the different acrostic psalms that can be found in Scripture. A number of psalms: 25, 34, 37, 111 and 112. 119 we've already looked at, 145. And the Psalms isn't the only place where we can find acrostic psalms. Nahum 1, verses 2 through 8, uses that same kind of form. When Proverbs 31 wants to write about the virtuous woman, in Proverbs 31:10 to 31, that's also an acrostic poem. So you could memorize each of those verses. Each one begins with a succeeding Hebrew letter. And then the book of Lamentations is pretty incredible. It has 5 chapters in it. 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 are acrostic. 3 goes through the alphabet 3 times. So you'll see 22 verses, 66 verses, 22 verses, and 22 verses. If we remember what we learned earlier about chiasm, that makes chapter 3 particularly important. So I invite you to check that out. Here are just a couple of anomalies that we'll talk about. Psalm 9 and 10 are an interesting anomaly, I guess. They together have the alphabet through 1 time. So we might say A through K in Psalm 9, and then the rest of the alphabet in the next psalm. But they have never appeared together in any text, indicating that they've never been a single psalm. So what was the author doing here? It leaves us with an interesting question. So it goes through the alphabet once, but it's always apparently been 2 psalms together. And then Psalm 145 is almost complete acrostic psalm, but the nun, the N, is missing. And so what are we to make of that? And so some commentators will think that it's just a defective construction. Other ones might say the topic indicates that perfection may not come as the psalm is describing. So sometimes we want to check and compare it to the content, because you can use the structure to bolster the argument in the content. So Psalm 145, talking about what is good and what is complete in terms of what's coming. And if the nun is missing right now, it's an indication things are not as complete as Psalm 145 will point us toward. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Check it out for yourself. Anytime there's an exception, it's worth taking a look at to see what the author is doing. Thanks for hanging out. We'll get back to you in a little bit. Thanks.